That's great. Tonight we'll be counting down, in no particular order, 9 of the most hellish examples of good policy intentions gone wrong. We'll start with a cluster of initiatives that can be broadly classified under the war on poverty. Number 9. The government's endless attempts to create affordable housing for all. Everybody needs housing. We all want it. National Review online contributor editor DeRoy Murdoch joins us. DeRoy, tell us a little bit about the folly of trying to create affordable housing for all, particularly poor and minority communities.
I think maybe the best example or illustration of this, if you remember going back maybe 10, 15 years now, there were a number of these big government housing projects, big high-rise structures where the government built housing for poor people. Guess what they did? They blew them up. You could see one of these buildings after another one just literally implode and fall to the ground. And I thought, boy, we had the Berlin Wall fall in between East and West Germany. Here in this country, that magnificent example of socialism come crashing down. As people realize when you put people in, essentially poor people, in huge warehouses, you create all kinds of negative social conditions. And what you found in many of those places is they've replaced them with lower level, 2 and 3 story buildings. People get to know their neighbors better, and it creates a more positive environment. So that's just one example of the endless quest for affordable housing on the part of the government.
That urban renewal, which was first sort of launched under Harry Truman as part of the Fair Deal, it was going to build many more and presumably affordable housing units for poor and minority. It actually reduced the net number while tearing down a lot of neighborhoods that people owned their own kind of properties.
And since we're in New York City, rent control does much the same thing, preventing new construction in many cases that would bring down costs for lower income folks.
And the unintended consequence of sinking all of this money into these developments is that you actually concentrated people in certain areas, didn't allow them to move out into the suburbs, which are also getting some investment from government, and you create a bunch of division that way as well. So
we have the federal government just all over housing policy, particularly over the last 20 years. It actually led in many cases to the mortgage crisis. Talk us through that a little bit.
Well, I think there was a bill signed by Bill Clinton called the Community Reinvestment Act, and essentially what it did is require banks to lend to almost anybody who would come in. I guess the idea was to reduce discrimination against minorities and so on. What ended up happening is there were people who were not very well qualified to pay back their loans because their income was too low. Now, it may have happened that they were more minority than they were white, but all this got couched in terms of, well, if you're a bank and you're not lending, it's not because this person has too little income to pay it back, but because you're a bunch of racists. Well, no bank wants to be called racist, so they said, okay, we'll lend. And they loaned a lot more money than people could pay back. All of a sudden, the economy starts starting to go downhill. People can't pay their mortgages go sour, the banks start going down, and pretty soon you have the collapse of 2008. If the government had not forced these banks to do that, or at least say, look, maybe rather than giving this loan right away, encourage these people to save up some money, raise the amount that they have to put in themselves or something like that, you wouldn't have had the utter collapse that we had in 2008, from which we're still suffering.
And let's not forget also that the federal government backed all of this in the terms of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, then therefore incentivizing these banks to basically make these kind of risky loans. We gotta move on. America has had a long and ugly history of both governmental and private discrimination against non-whites, and the